Welcome back to the channel. In the last video I was able to pick up another Hellcat swap, but before I can use the swap in a project, I'm gonna have to go through everything because the car was in a very significant accident, and today I'm gonna be working on the Supercharger and showing you guys how to tear one of these things down and what to look for, especially if you're gonna be buying an auction car or buying a bad Supercharger or a Supercharger with a belt sucked into it off of Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist, and if it's gonna be any good. So the first thing that I'm very concerned about is the main throttle body is missing this piece right here. And the reason I'm concerned about that is if this piece went through the Supercharger, this whole Supercharger is nothing but a paperweight. It's just scrap aluminum, because it's gonna, that piece is gonna mess up the rotors, it's gonna score the housing, there's no way to fix it. So hopefully this piece did not go through the Supercharger rotors and we'll have a good Supercharger housing and a Supercharger. The next thing is this diverter valve throttle body. I don't foresee any issues with it, just replace it. It has, pieces missing, everything's broken. We should be good there. The next thing I'm very worried about is the belt being sucked into the pulley and abruptly stopping the rotors. So the rotors have a lot of mass to them, and the issue with that is how this Supercharger is timed, and that this Supercharger, the IHI Superchargers from the Hellcats, don't have any keying for the rotors. So what that means is they're kind of like an Ecotec Chevy, and they're a cone slip fit, or not a slip fit, like a compressed cone fit. And if there's any abrupt stops, that rotor still has a lot of mass and it wants to keep moving. It could slip on that cone, which puts it out of time. So I'm gonna show you guys how to tear one of these apart and what to look for, and hopefully we have an in-time Supercharger. If it's not in time, you're gonna have to send this thing off, have it rebuilt, have them retime it, and it's worth doing, because these Superchargers, if it's just out of time, it makes sense to just have it rebuilt, have new bearings put in it. Then you could do a ported snout, new smaller throttle body, high-speed bearings, etc. So let's get this thing apart. And one tool that I would recommend getting if you're gonna buy a Hellcat or plan on upgrading a Hellcat is the AAD Performance Supercharger pulley tool removal. And this is a billet aluminum tool. I've used this thing multiple times. It comes in handy if you have a Hellcat and want to swap pulleys. It's billet aluminum, really nice, works really well. I've used it in many videos. Check it out. They're really cheap compared to other tools, and they work very well. So let's get to work on this, get everything torn down. The first thing I'm gonna do is pull the lid, pull this throttle body, pull the throttle body here, pull the snout. Then we could get the snout torn down and kind of go from there. Fuel rails are already unbolted. I'll pull those off because I'm not going to be using those injectors. Lid's already been off, so usually they just need to be pulled off the seal. Diverter valve, which is also a throttle body, is just T30 Torx. There's 4 of them. Now the throttle body is removed, you want to make sure to save all these little rubber seals. You can get brand new ones, but the Supercharger only has 40,000 miles, so I don't see replacing those as a big deal. There's also little rubber seals for these bolt holes, and you're going to want to make sure you don't lose those, which I'm actually surprised they're still there, because sometimes they stick to the Supercharger lid. Next, you're going to remove the Supercharger bypass rubber seal slash plate, and you have to remove this to remove the snout. And then also T30 Torx. Get a little pry bar or a big one and pop that seal. To remove this bolt right here, you have to remove this sensor. And just remove the sensor and turn it, lift it. Make sure you don't cut the O-ring. To get the snout off of the Supercharger, you're gonna have to hit it with a mallet, because how the pulley is keyed in the shaft, it has a bunch of little cones, and all those little plastic cones are pretty tight. So just, I might actually need a bigger mallet here, but most of the time I just whack her right there. That one came out pretty easy. Just kind of wiggle her back and forth. Until she comes off of the cones. You can see all those little plastic cones in there. I still don't see that piece from the throttle body yet. I now have my flashlight on my phone. I don't see, I see like a dead bug in there, like a grasshopper or something. I don't see that piece anywhere, which is kind of a good sign so far. What I'm going to try, I'm not going to move it much because it looks like there's a bunch of just junk because they had the lid off. You can see all this stuff I want to clean up. But let's try to turn the supercharger rotors and hopefully they spin. Ooh. Well, they definitely move. Looks like this one has a nick on the Teflon coating. But I want to clean these things up. To be able to remove the pulley, you have to get this little like rubber plastic cover off. But there's no real good way to get this off without damaging it. And they sell replacements for really cheap. So all you do is put a screwdriver kind of at an angle and hammer it through and then pop it off. So now you can see the like huge Allen that comes with the AAD Performance Supercharger Pulley Removal Tool. You just stick that in there. Then you have to get a socket for both sides. Or what you could do, what I like to do, is you just stick this end in a vise. Cinch her down. Then you could stick the AAD Performance tool on here, and then you don't have to hold it. All you do is put a 1/2 inch breaker bar up there. There she goes. You can see how bad that belt is stuck in there. I'll show you that in a second. Looks like all this is good. Seems kind of tight though. And now you can see how bad that belt got sucked in that pulley. I mean, it's like part of the pulley. So it did spin. Looks like it spun for quite a bit after it did it. So it might have helped not get these rotors out of time, which is what I'm hoping. So this pulley to me is pretty much a bad supercharger pulley. I mean, it's probably still good, but I'm not planning on reusing something that was in an accident like this. So we'll throw this, or maybe save it, but probably not plan on using it. I'll probably put like an X or something on it. I'll save the throttle body because I could weld a V-band on there. They're already all unbolted, so I just want to get them out of the way. Pretty straightforward. What I do is test fit my fuel rails because it shows that Hellcat and Trackhawk are different. And I think it's a lie. I think these fuel rails are going to work on all the IHI superchargers, which is dope. Fortunately, this is the less desirable supercharger. As you can see, you can kind of see the core, that little shelf right here doesn't go all the way up to it, which also doesn't give it as much support. I guess these superchargers are splitting in this area because, or when they blew up or whatever, they you know, they didn't have the extra support that connected in between each cylinder. So you can also see these vent tubes. So these are vent tubes for the supercharger oiling system, or the oil that's in the supercharger. So you can see there's a little residual from it leaking because it's a vent tube. But besides that, she looks good. I might just end up refreshing this and selling it as a good supercharger, but we'll see. I also want to replace these. You can see how much oil or blow-by is in each of the cylinders, or in each of these, and that's because this right here, you can see this one's blown out right there. It's a perfect example of why there's all this extra blow-by in each of these, because they're both blown out. You could exactly see it, even though they're clamped down. Look at that. It's a perfect example of why you want to put the spacers that are either hard plastic or billet aluminum to actually close those off, so they're not just a blow, like a, you know, a failure point for oil from the crankcase to get into the engine. It feels very tight. I mean, it feels, I don't know, it feels really good, but it also feels like it got kind of tight, because this is a normal right hand thread bolt. And what I think might have happened when this belt got pushed in is it might have just pushed this bearing in a little bit. So, and it kind of looks like it's further in, so I don't want to have load on this shaft. But man, it feels nice and tight. It doesn't have any play. It just kind of feels a little bit too tight. I now have the supercharger all torn down, and it's a usable supercharger. Like I said before, it's missing some Teflon on the rotors, but that's not that big of a deal. This car supposedly had 40,000 plus miles on it. The rotors spin fine. They don't sound like they're rubbing. Also, there isn't any Teflon missing from the backside or the front side, which means the bearings aren't worn out, and it did have a stock pulley on it. So most of the time that happens and the rotors contact the faces is when they have a smaller pulley on them, because the issue with these is then they get out of time and then they want to push on each other. So looks like they're good. Don't have any concerns with this supercharger. I need to most likely pull these bearings on this shaft. This shaft is super tight, and I'm guessing that happened. I mean, it's probably fine, but I want to put new high-speed bearings in that snout. I'll probably end up porting it when I do that. But I think what happened was, since the belt got squished in between there, it pushed this bearing back, which that bearing is going to fail eventually. So another issue with the supercharger, and I want to upgrade it, is this is a pre-18 Hellcat supercharger, which means there's these dividers for each cylinder that goes up to this intercooler core. This doesn't have it, which makes less power. And also, if the supercharger blows up, there isn't that ribbing, and it'll just blow the whole side of the supercharger. So I have, which I need to rebuild this supercharger over here, the one from that 18 Trackhawk. And as you can see, these ribs go all the way up to the cores, instead of just being pretty much, you know, 5 mil or 10 mil up from the base of the flange. So what I'm going to do is order all the parts to fix this supercharger, redo the bearings, port the snout, get a new throttle body, get a smaller pulley, and most likely it's missing the gasket. So I'll have to get this whole gasket up here, and we'll be good to go. Put everything back together, throw it on the engine. I'm also going to, like I showed you, these gaskets where the, here, I'll show you on the engine. So right, I guess I can't show you on the engine, but where the crankcase comes out, those gaskets were blown, and that makes a lot of sense why there's so much residual oil in everything. Since there was all this residual oil, it kind of makes sense. So what I'm going to do is get the spacers, and then that'll resolve that whole issue. I won't have to worry about a bunch of blow-by getting inside the engine, getting inside the supercharger, and that is a big problem with Hellcats. Those stock gaskets are very prone to failure. Now that I'm finished tearing down the supercharger, and it's good, but it does need a few parts. It needs new bearings in the snout, and I need to get the tool to remove this shaft. I'm going to end the video here. If you like these videos, make sure to click the subscribe button, thumbs up, throw a comment below. As always, see you guys next time.